Time to play the game. Time to play the game. What? I'm thirsty. Undisturbed reviews. Hey, remember WCW?
I don't know!
You know, that company with decades of history going back to the roots of modern-day professional wrestling that was then mismanaged into a $60 million loss in 1 year, bought out in 2001 for roughly the price of a bag of chips, and subsequently vanished off the face of the earth and out of the collective minds of the public within a few months? I sure don't. I only started watching wrestling in 2009. But it was within that period of severe mismanagement and copious spending that the game WCW Backstage Assault came out, November 8th, 2000. You see, for a time, the Japanese game developer Sin Sophia Inc., or as they were called at the time, Akai Corporation, or Aki Corporation, I don't really know, made wrestling games primarily for WCW with critically acclaimed games such as WCW vs. NWO World Tour and WCW vs. NWO Revenge, all published by THQ. But I'm going to assume that Akai Corporation probably saw how popular the WWF was becoming in the late 90s and said, well, fuck this noise.
Fuck this!
And jumped ship and went on to make WrestleMania 2000 and WWF No Mercy, two games that are popularly considered a few of the best wrestling games of all time, which was all made possible by the WWF entering a 12-year publishing deal with THQ, which in turn forced WCW to terminate their own contract with THQ because they didn't want to share publishers with their competitors. Dumb move. So that left WCW without a paddle as far as video game tie-ins were concerned, so they ended up working with Electronic Arts and Kodiak Software to release WCW Mayhem in 1999, and later the game that we'll be talking about today, WCW Backstage Assault, which was a direct competitor to WWF No Mercy, which was only released 9 days later. Here's a visual representation of that matchup. WCW Backstage Assault is popularly considered one of, if not the worst wrestling game ever made, and is practically a microcosm of WCW in late 2000, that is to say, an absolute mess. Fitting, really, coming out only roughly 4 months before WCW's eventual demise. I only knew this game by reputation up until now, and I only bought it because of its reputation, but you know, maybe there is more to this game. Maybe it was judged too harshly initially, so let's play some WCW Backstage Assault.
Look at the adjective! Play!
Verb! And see if it holds up, and see if it passes the nostalgia test. And if you're not down with that, well, I got 2 words for ya!
Fuck this!
Okay, that genuinely fucked up my throat. Get ready for this voice for the rest of the review. So we open up with a good old-fashioned montage. AIDS! All of the AIDS! Well, it was a nice montage anyway, so we have a few options here, but the only ones you really want to be paying attention to are Exhibition, Hardcore Challenge, and Hardcore Gauntlet, because the rest are pretty self-explanatory. Basically, Exhibition is just quick play, Hardcore Challenge is where you compete for a title, and Hardcore Gauntlet is where you play through 7 sequential matches without stopping or healing. But it's all the same, really. There's no story mode, so at least I don't have to talk about that, but as a result, I could play footage from any of these modes, and you couldn't even guess which is which gets me to my first major issue with the gameplay, which is... Okay, never mind, we have bigger fish to fry. Wow, this game looks straight up ugly. I know it's churlish to criticize PS1 graphics, but even by those standards, this game is ugly as hell. The issue here is the art style and the use of 3D is some of the ugliest I've ever seen, even by the 5th generation standards, and I noticed this from the moment the gameplay demo started. I was shocked. The scaling is terrible, the models are incredibly poorly rendered, like, just look at those arms, they look like stubby knobs with french fries at the end. Those are not how arms are supposed to look. The proportions are all over the place, making everybody look like malformed mutants. Like, for example, most characters have pectorals that take up half their upper body. The animation is incredibly stilted, everybody walks like they have a broom shoved up their ass, and most notably, every animation has a noticeable jitter to it, and if you try to grapple, Jesus Christ, it's like your character suddenly contracted Parkinson's or pissed off Andre the Giant.
I want him back on that ring!
Anytime two models try and interact, it's about as smooth as a Sabu table spot. The grapple animation looks like they're warming up their rotator cuffs, and if they strike, fucking hell, it looks like they're dancing.
Hey, look at this. I call it the new Jack.
Any attempt at detail looks laughable, like Kevin Nash's saggy grandma tits. Most of these characters don't even resemble their real-life counterparts, like how Booker T looks more like Ernie Hudson than Booker T. Scott Steiner looks like a slightly buff grandpa. Actually, on second thought, he looks more like Colonel Sanders. What's the matter, Sanders? Chicken? But I think the worst is Jimmy Hart.
Wcw Backstage Assault.
I can't even begin to describe everything wrong with this picture. Just everything. The proportions, the sharp and pointy limbs, everything. And that's just scraping the surface. Every character is hideous. This is one of the worst looking PS1 games I've ever seen. And you know what's sad? Remember what year I said this came out? 2000. You want to know what else came out in 2000? That's right, we're going back to this well again. How is it that you have two games coming out on the same system on the same year that look like night and freaking day? I had the urge to look up the last game, WCW Mayhem, to see how much worse it looked, but no. That game actually looks a degree better. It actually looks like a passable wrestling game. So what happened? What the hell happened between games to make them regress so much? I guess the actual environments you fight in look alright. There's nothing I can point to and say that it looks terrible, but I can't really look at anything and say that it looks particularly good either. They're just okay. But between the stilted, jittery animation, the horrible looking models, and the lack of resemblance to the actual people these characters represent, this game just looks unfinished, or barely started really. It's ugly, 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 even by PS1 standards, and here's a fun tidbit. When it's not ugly, it's just lazy, like how when you win a hardcore challenge match, it's just a picture of something completely unrelated instead of an actual victory animation, like Eric Bischoff, who looks less like he's celebrating a win and more like he's stretching, Psycho Sid looking like he just found a pair of scissors, and of course they have Hulk Hogan.
Of course. Even in video game form, Hulk Hogan has to use his creative control to be the center of attention. What'd you say, brother? Hey, look, a black guy. Where?
But at least the loading screens look alright. You got various personal favorites like DDP and Sting, so they look pretty good as far as loading screens go. Wait, who the fuck is this guy? It looks like somebody from the dev team snuck in a few workout pics so he could be famous because he has less definition than a blank dictionary written by Colin Delaney. Seriously, I'm pretty sure I'm in better shape than this guy. Though to be fair, I take bumps about as well as anybody who says that wrestling doesn't hurt, because oh boy, does it hurt, and those people would probably shatter if they took a bump. Funny story, I remember one time in freshman year gym class, we were briefly doing a wrestling unit. This wrestling, not this wrestling. And we were doing this game where, while on your knees, you had to get a medicine ball back to your side of the padding by any means necessary. It was dumb, and I was against this big guy. And I mean big guy. I don't want to have to bring up this comparison again. Anyway, using my speed, I grabbed the medicine ball as quickly as I could, but before I could get away, motherfucker grabbed me from behind and basically German suplexed me. He won, and I was pretty much done after that. True story. It was fun though, but there's a reason why I'm not a wrestler. I did get some more practice though. The same year, I was at a friend's birthday party, and we were all on his trampoline, and I was doing wrestling moves on whoever volunteered, including when I say jump, choke slams, though sometimes they didn't even volunteer. I drop kicked this one guy like 30 times. Anyway, me and this other guy got into a shoot fight, and I got him into this weird armbar where his arm was across my chest and I was pushing against his body. He said he wasn't gonna tap. He tapped. Good times. Not really. Anyway, there's a review in here somewhere. Sound design wise, this game is about as good as you would expect. The commentary is surprisingly competent and reacts to the gameplay well enough, aside from a few too many repeated one-liners, but the fact that they could even get it to work as well as they did is impressive. There doesn't seem to be any audio loading while loading the lines a la Resident Evil.
I'll be examining this. Hope this is not Chris's blood.
Otherwise, the impact sound effects and whatnot are basically as good as they need to be, but considering you're fighting on cement, it didn't quite have the same impact as it should have.
You should get a 2 count.
It just doesn't feel like you're landing on cement. The only actual songs are the ones on the menu, and they're okay. I like this one in particular. It has a nice guerrilla radio vibe to it. The entrance videos are also translated pretty well, minus compression, though I never noticed how many entrance themes in WCW are ripped off. This is a problem with the company more than the game, but do any Nirvana fans recognize this riff?
Self-high five.
Or do any Black Sabbath fans recognize this? But other than that, the sound design and soundtrack is fine. Not amazing, just fine.
I told you.
There's no context for that. I just wanted to show it. Let's watch it some more.
So after all that, we're left with the one thing that really knocks this game into unforgivably bad territory: the wrestling gameplay. I put wrestling in quotation marks because wrestling would imply that there's some sort of ring. Problem is, as the title might imply, this game is entirely set in backstage areas, so this is less a wrestling game and more of a backstage brawl game with wrestling moves. Here's the thing, I don't see the point in making a wrestling game and not including actual legitimate wrestling in a 20x20 ring unless this is Impact Wrestling. It would be like a Zelda game without dungeons, or a Call of Duty game without guns. It's an implied essential component to the experience that kinda makes you wonder why even bother without it. In other wrestling games, even recent ones, you could go backstage and brawl there, but only having the backstage kinda misses the point. What did taking the standard wrestling matches away add to the game, and more to the point, what was here that couldn't have just been added as an optional mode in a standard wrestling game? Nothing. What's left after they took away the ring isn't really that good either. Sure, the novelty of having ultra-violent matches where people bleed every time is fun, and the gameplay is responsive enough, though much less responsive than other wrestling games of the time, but sooner or later the major problems really start to wear on you, and as implied, the biggest one is repetition. No matter what mode you pick, you're always doing the exact same thing: grappling your opponent to do various moves on them or hitting them with a weapon. There are spots where you can do other moves around you, like where you can do turnbuckle style moves on this stack of tires, or you can jump off things like this truck, but the problem is, this just doesn't come up that much because with environments that are as big as these, it takes much more preparation to set up your opponent, and the collision isn't very good on things like dives, so it's much more expedient to just hit them with a grapple. The strikes in this game are terrible because the hit detection is shite. There's no point in doing them. They might be useful for knocking a weapon out of your opponent's hands, but other than that, it's no use. All of these wrestlers replaced their genitals with whistles. Now let's talk about these weapons. It was fun at first to be so hyper-violent with such a wide variety of weapons until I realized they all act the exact same. Sure, they're different sizes, each have some impressive albeit glitchy physics, and give different effects like electrocution or burn if you combine, say, the 2x4 with a flaming barrel, which is a bitch, but at the end of the day, they all act the same. They're items that you pick up and hit somebody with. Sure, some of them are two-handed, some of them are blocks, and some are cylindrical, but they all do the exact same thing. They don't feel different to use in terms of weight or speed. There's no special perks or animation to say using a mirror as opposed to a steel chair, so once the novelty wears off, it's as mundane as anything else in this game. It's all the same, which brings me back around to my major problem: it's all the same. Every match plays out in the exact same way. We start out and exchange blows until inevitably one of us gets the upper hand and spams move after move until a contextual icon appears telling you to go for the KO. Then you just need to use 30 mana to summon Kevin Owens, who will then dance a jig and your opponent will laugh himself to death and you'll win by countout. I may be misremembering some of that, but seriously, once you hit them with a big move after the KO indicator comes up, they fall unconscious. Then you win. Sure, you can submit or pin them, but getting the pin is so arbitrary it's not even worth it. You can hit them with 3 finishers in a row and they'll kick out, but sometimes you'll hit them with a basic move and then they'll stay down.
Man, who's writing this shit? Vince Russo? Oh, right.
And submitting is still a bit unreliable, but it's way more reliable than pinning, so there's that. But really, almost every match will end via KO because it's the only consistent winning scenario, and it's the only win variable that's guaranteed to happen at some point. So sure, the game can be fun, but if every match plays out in the exact same way, it gets very repetitive very quickly. Of course, there are other environments, but once again, all it does is change the layout and basic hazards. It doesn't actually change the functionality of the matches. To put it into perspective, what are the differences in gameplay between Hell in a Cell, a steel cage, or a ladder match in any other wrestling game? Fundamental gameplay is changed between modes, but what is the difference between bathroom and locker room? Nothing. It all comes around to being the same thing. This game has a million ways for you to do the exact same thing. They tried to disguise it, but I noticed it. And why is that?
Because when it comes to these game developers, I am twice the man that they are, and I have half the brain that they do! Ah, fuck, I fucked up. Can I do that again?
No, it's live, House.
There are minor changes in the hardcore challenge game mode, like how it will unlock new areas for you to fight in, and you need to win a certain amount of matches to win a championship, which ends up in the Hall of Champions. It gives you something at least, but it only changes the context of the matches rather than the matches themselves. So while it may give you some drive, it doesn't do anything functionally to change the matches. So once again, it's essentially pointless. But I will say, I did enjoy fighting people that I've never heard of, like who the hell is AWOL, or Canyon, or Big Vito? WCW in the year 2000, ladies and gentlemen. Now, I do know David Flair as Ric Flair's son, and judging by the video here, he has about as much charisma as a cardboard box. He has negative charisma. He was a personality vacuum. He was anti-intro- Okay, enough of that. I did actually attempt to make my CAW the Shadow in this game, aka the Shadow of my past, who's like a combination of Raven and, well, Raven. Now, if you need to know what CAW stands for, it means Creator Wrestler, and it's essentially a wrestling fan's equivalent of a fursona, but less dignified. The customization in this game isn't super extensive, which is acceptable for PS1, but I thought there were going to be no slots for custom characters, so I ended up reskinning Jeff Jarrett, so the Shadow is tainted with original sin.
Hey, I got a joke for you guys, alright? So what's the difference between Jeff Jarrett and an art student? An art student can draw. Music sting! It's not what I meant.
The camera is the worst in any wrestling game I've ever played. It's just jittery and all over the place. Plus, your movement is tied to the camera, and so if you're trying to move from one area to another and the camera switches, you can just go eat a pepper steak, motherfucker. There's a momentum system where you can activate your finisher by staying in control of the match for long enough, but one, the momentum fills up way too quickly. I was reliably getting my finisher off within the first minute of the match, and they would always get up right away like this is an indie show or something, so they might as well not even have it. There's nothing special about your finisher. But two, and this is the bigger issue, this is a one-size-fits-all version of a finisher system. In real life, you have flying finishers, turnbuckle finishers, submission finishers, etc. But the only finisher you can pull off here, to my knowledge, is a standing grapple. So most of the characters' finishers are these really generic moves because, guess what? A lot of people don't have standing grapple finishers. So what's even the point for most of them? Besides, if you finish the match with a finisher, you're doing it wrong because you can complete matches in certain ways to unlock certain characters. Like if you light a character on fire, you unlock Vampiro.
Oh god. No, not Vampiro!
These match conditions are something I actually like because it adds a hint of strategy, like saving certain weapons for the end of a match, and there are secret weapons you can find in crates, but once again, they're functionally the same as the other weapons, so it doesn't matter. None of that can save the game, however. I think the ultimate damning flaw of WCW Backstage Assault is that aside from being insanely repetitive, it just feels unfinished. I've heard this game is glitchy, but I didn't really experience many glitches other than DDP trying to phase through a locker. But it's unfinished in every other way. It's ugly, the collision is terrible, there's no variety, but really, this game just fails from the very outset, the very concept stages, because once you set out to make a wrestling game with no actual wrestling, it's just asking for a bad time. I'll admit, I had some fun at first, and while I heard this game was glitchy, I didn't have many issues myself, but it's the type of game that regardless of how much fun you start out having, it gets very boring very quickly. That combined with all the other issues, and this game absolutely fails.
So unfortunately, WCW Backstage Assault does not pass the nostalgia test. In theory, a game about backstage brawling could be fun, but blatantly unfinished mechanics and repetition really ruin this game. And even then, backstage brawling should be part of the whole like so many other games did, and not the whole game. While I wouldn't necessarily call it the worst wrestling game ever made, it's undeniable that it's at least up there. However, this game does have one feature that makes it almost unique amongst wrestling games. It's the only game that I know of where you can brutally beat the fuck out of Vince Russo with a flaming 2x4. Let's do that thing.
Fire! How did this match go this far?
Screw it, I'm probably gonna get a restraining order anyway.
Yeah, fuck you. This is for David Arquette, this is for putting the title on yourself, this is for Judy Bagwell on a forklift, this is for Mike Awesome, this is for calling all Finn Balor fans gay.
That actually happened.
This is for TNA, this is for the Brawl for All, this is for the Reverse Battle Royal.
And this is just cause I'm a spiteful cunt. Oh yeah! And now to finish you off with my secret weapon.
Make you fuck you bye.
And nothing of value was lost.
This video was brought to you in part by my lovely patrons. I thank you for your continued support. If you want to become a patron for TGX, the link is in the description.
It's all about the gamer. I know you're playing all about controller, and if you can take it all about your debtor, and if you can play it all about controlling who's gonna make it. I am the gamer. You don't wanna play me. I am controller. The way you can take it.